Time around in Dallas.
And he had moved there from Missouri, and before that he grew up in California, got clean there, and we got along right away, and we've been through a lot of stuff together, marriages, divorces, deaths in the family. All those things that happen. If we stay clean and hang out here for a while, all those life events that happen. And I mean, one of the things that's happened for me staying clean is I've been able to develop intimate relationships with men over decades. And he's one of those people. And he is one of my nearest and dearest and closest friends that I can call any time and talk about anything. And I would not be alive today without it. And with that, I give you Dana S.
Dana, I'm an addict. Quite an introduction. I know that we've been through a lot of thick and thin over the years, and I've talked a lot about my relationship with this guy, and it's closer than I was with any of my brothers, my sisters, or probably anybody besides my wife. My wife asked me, "Who's going to introduce you?" I says, "Well, if you're not going to be there, it's got to be Cooper. Who else is going to be?" So. But I am grateful to be here, and at the same time, I'm not. I have successfully avoided doing this particular job in Narcotics Anonymous for 34 years plus. I got lying just a little bit. 34 years ago, I actually aspired to do this someday. I listened to all those people on speakers, and I go, "Yeah, I could do that shit. I'd be great." And then, I don't know, somewhere in Oakland, California, somebody asked me to do a birthday meeting one time with like about 80 people or 100 people. And I got up there and realized that I wasn't all that hot, And I was burning up in front of them just like I am now. And I just, I just got over it. And I've avoided it. I kept on looking at Cooper, looking for speakers, and I would just kind of duck around and not say anything and say, "Yeah, that guy over there might be good, But, as well as he knew me, he actually had not put it together until there's a couple of, I guess I got to be an alternate last spring, and that meant that automatically I'm going to be here tonight. So. But I didn't stress a whole lot about it. I did a little bit. I talked about it to people at my church, people at meetings, and told them that I was not looking forward to this. And the reason is because, I was just a general run-of-the-mill addict. I got loaded. I don't think anybody here needs any instructions on that crap. I got loaded. I'd get arrested periodically, usually at the end of a car wreck or some crap, and I would come to in the Monterey County Jail in California in a tank. Somebody'd be kicking me in the ribs trying to hand me a plate of, that pancake stuff and some kind of mystery meat that they would give you, a hockey puck looking thing, and I would just puke all over the place, and I would feel better, of course, after doing that, but it didn't feed, I wasn't really interested in eating. And that's kind of the story of my addiction. I mean, there's not a whole lot to it. I got loaded the first time. Well, actually, I got loaded the first time in Lovelock, Nevada. But I really blossomed in Salinas, California, and that was my home for about 25 years. I did finish up in Oakland, California. When I was in Oakland, I was working for Haight-Ashbury Free Clinics, and I got blessed with the opportunity to work with a bunch of addicts coming out of San Quentin and Folsom Prison who had this unfortunate proclivity of getting loaded and going right back in. And it was a fluke, I always kind of aspired to be a drug counselor, but my sponsor was, he was a drug counselor for Monterey County Health Department, and he walked up, I was walking up to him, and I told him I wanted to be like him. I wanted to grow up to be like Bobby. And as I was walking up, he was telling this rummy, he says, yeah, these fucking addicts get, 2 years clean, and they all think they know something. They all want to be counselors. And ding, the light bulb went on, and I knew that it wasn't for me. And so I didn't embarrass myself. I just walked away from that. And a few years later, I was in an elevator in Oakland, California, driving down in an ECI building, and this lady got on at the 3rd floor. I was on the 5th floor doing a job interview, and she got on, and I'm wearing like a $1,000 Pierre Cardin suit. About 6 years clean. Got a $200 tie, Stacey Adams shoe. I mean, I was styling, man. I even had a $300 Dobbs hat, And this lady looks over at me and she says, how long have you been clean? I was wearing a little tiny NorCal convention pin, about the size of my fingernail on the pinky, right? I mean, I forgot it was there, and nobody should have been able to notice it anyway. And she pointed it out to me, and I just kind of blushed. And I said, well, and I told her it was like 5 or 6 years, whatever it was at that time. And she struck up a conversation, and we carried it all the way out into the street. And, the next thing I knew, she says, well, what are you doing here in the city? And she figured out that I wasn't from there. And I says, yeah, well, I just left the job interview upstairs. And she says, well, how did it go? I says, I hope it didn't go well. It's a federal halfway house. They're looking for a babysitter, and I don't want to do that. And she says, well, what do you want to do? And I says, I have no idea what I want to do when I grow up. And she says, well, while you're trying to figure it out, why don't you come work for me? I says, who the hell are you? She says, I'm Carol Daniels. I'm the deputy director of Haight-Ashbury Free Clinics. And I'm like, what do you want me to do? I don't believe in that methadone crap, And she says, yeah, I didn't figure you would, but, we've got this bunch of convicts coming in upstairs, on the 3rd floor. We've got half the 3rd floor upstairs, and they've got this unfortunate proclivity getting loaded, going right back in. And she says, how would you like to try and help us break the cycle? And I sign me up. And so I went to work doing that, and I told her I had no experience. And back then, it was a whole different animal than what it is nowadays. It was, basically paperwork, and this everyday, job was like keeping a logbook on, such and such had a breakthrough on this group, and keep an eye on this one because he seems agitated over something that came up, and I'm trying to do blah, blah. And then, about once or twice a month, we'd all get together, go over their sheets, and we would work on treatment plans and do individuals with them, and blah, blah. I mean, it was a whole different game, man. And by the time I left, I was in Cocoa, Florida. And I would do one group with like 15 people. It was outpatient, and then most of the rest of my day was paperwork talking about that one group. And I got the feeling that I wasn't really doing my job anymore. I would be 6 hours on paperwork and like 90 minutes with these people and maybe get an individual. And I just kind of went, I can't do this no more. And God always provides, and when I walked outside and was like standing out there smoking, because that's what I always do when I'm agitated, I went out and smoked, right? And this little guy comes walking by, and I saw him every day, and he was always jolly and jovial. And he says, Mr. Sloan, you don't look like you're very happy today. And I says, yeah, I'm not, Larry. I'm just done. I'm done with this crap, And he says, well, what are you going to do, if you don't do this? And I says, well, I could do anything. I don't care. I could pump gas and probably make just about as much money. And he said, well, I can't see you doing that, so why don't you go over and see Miss Jill over next door and tell her that you're going to come to work for us and let me know how much time you need to give those people notice. And I ended up working for the guy. I didn't even know what he did next door, and turns out he worked with people with disabilities, and he set me down at a desk, and he gave me about 4 or 5 big 3-inch binders and said, start reading this stuff and learn everything you can, and I'll come talk at you from time to time and see how you're doing. And he set me at his desk because he had just gotten promoted, so I sat at his desk where he used to be, and I sat there for almost a year reading these things, and once in a while he'd come popping in, and he'd say, come with me, Mr. Sloan, and we'd go take it off, and he would have me do an ADA assessment of people, and places, and seeing if they were accessible, and blah, blah, blah. And I had no idea what I was doing when I walked in, and by the time I got actually to work and doing the thing that I was supposed to be doing, I was probably the best 88 gunslinger in Brevard County in Florida. And, all of these things I've been talking about, they're God's story, and my whole story is God's story. And when I started stressing about what I was going to say and get up here, that was the first thing that popped into my head finally was, I don't have to worry about what I'm going to say because God's going to talk for me. Because this is not my story. Every time I took over my life in the last 30, 40 plus years, I screwed it up. And God would bail me out. And, and I've had a lot of failures in that 34 years because I've done that stupid crap. I got a sponsor. My sponsor is currently my first sponsor is in California, and he's dying of cancer. And I tried to call him just before I came into here to tell him. He used to go and do these things all the time, all across the country, and I just always admired him for doing it, but I didn't want any part of it, right? And so I wanted to call him and tell him that I was finally doing this crap, and it's his fault because I was just laying low and trying to dodge it, but anyway, I wanted to let Bobby know, and I don't know. The last time I talked to him, they told him he had 3 to 6 months to live, and they would give him maybe another 3 months if he would take chemo, and he was taking the chemo the last I saw, but he said if it started interfering with his quality of life, he was going to stop, and that meant that he was going to die quicker. And so I don't know why he's not picking up the phone the last couple of weeks, but he hasn't picked up. So I got him in my prayers. But anyway, Bobby was my first sponsor, and he broke things down in a way that I could understand them. And when we started out, I had gone over to his house. We started out, he gave me his phone number. I don't know about the rest of you people, but that's the way my sponsorship family usually works. Somebody comes up and says, hey, can I talk to you? Can you give me your phone number? And I say, yeah, and I give him my phone number, and I say, call me up, and we'll talk about it sometime, And then they either call or they don't. Like 99.9% of the time, they will never call you before. It's the quickest way to get rid of a newcomer, man, is just give them your phone number. Nowadays, if they do actually get a hold of you, it's by text. They do this shit. I don't really talk well this way. I don't even do it very well. I can't even do it as fast as my thumbs are moving. But they all want to text, and I'm old school. I said call me, and they don't seem to understand that. So far I haven't had a whole lot of success in the last couple of years, but I have sponsored some people with some pretty long time, but they actually learned how to make those phone calls, And part of the reason that I'm still clean is because I have people in my life that I can call. If the crap's really hitting the fan, he lives down the road, I can call him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I have people from the East Coast to the West Coast and all in between that I can call. And that's the way I do it, is I call them, and I can talk about real things. And the real things that happened to me have been, I've gone through divorces, 2 of them, stark raving clean, and I didn't have to get loaded over it. I went to work one day in Seaside, California. I grabbed the door and I pulled it and slammed my head into the door because they had closed the place. And I didn't have to get loaded over it. They've actually gone out of business and not bothered to tell me about it before I got there. And, I ended up practically homeless and living under a bridge for about a month and a half before I found something else to go and get me off the street, and I didn't have to get loaded over that when I had to relocate and get used to another home group. And, all my life has always been a little series of things like that that when I tried to take control, I would screw it up, but all of a sudden God would step in and handle it for me when I finally gave up and surrendered. And, the divorces, I have this, I did not know how to do relationships. I got married in 1974 to the woman that I'd gone through 4 years of high school. She went through 4 years of high school with me. I dropped out a long time before that, but we got married, and she was with me in this rampage that I had for an addiction. And then at 2 years clean, it all blew up in our faces, and she didn't like the guy I'd grown up to be. And the men in this program walked me through that, and I did not have to get loaded over it, And that was the beginning of my education in this program. Is there is nothing in this program that God doesn't put somebody in your life that can't walk you through it, and I don't have to get loaded no matter what. And a lot of times I wanted to, but I figured out that if I don't get loaded today, then tomorrow or next week or next month or whenever this crap clears up, I'm going to be really glad that I didn't get loaded. But today, I'd really like to sometimes, right? But so far, I've been able to do that for a little over 12,748 days, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's you people's fault today, mine. You guys are the ones who walked me through this. And after that, I came to West Virginia. I married a girl that I met some 30-some years ago, and she had this funny accent, so I always remembered her. And she called me up in about 1999, and I had left California. I was in Missouri, living along the Lake of the Ozarks. And she called up, and I knew that she had lost her husband because she married a friend of mine named Stuart and drug him back to West Virginia. And he drowned in the Greenbrier River in about 1995, 96. And so I knew she was a widow woman, and I knew she was, down here. And she called up, and she asked if I remembered her. I says, yeah, and we started flirting on the phone. I was safely 4 states away, so it was okay, And we did that for about 6 months, and then one day she offered to sell me a truck because my car caught on fire, and when I came to buy the truck, I ended up hauling her home to meet Mom and Dad and everybody, and we got married in 2000, and that was the best man at my wedding show anyway, at a church, and that woman has always cared for me, and she's sitting at home now just because we're raising a grandkid, and she's got a job, and so somebody has to pick her up at 10:30, and she can't possibly get back to Beckley by 10:30 if she comes to hear me, so. But anyway, she's been my best friend for a long, long time, and because of that friendship, we had a strong foundation in our marriage, and that's a good thing because, like I mentioned before, I don't do relationships really well. I'm not easy to live with, and so she eventually we started having issues and started fading apart. And I went out and screwed the pooch and really screwed up this relationship in a lot of different ways. And we separated for almost a year. And during that year was one of my hardest times. I had a sponsee that I sponsored for about 10 years, and he died with about 30 years clean in the middle of all that. And we were really attached, and that hurt a whole bunch. And I've lost a whole lot of guys in that same period. And I don't know about anybody else in this room, but when I'm sponsoring somebody, I actually kind of get attached to them, and when they pass, it's not an easy deal. It's not an easy road to hoe. But at the same time, I've always been really clear that addicts die, and there's nothing I can do to change that. And so I try to move on, and I try to use that experience to pass on to somebody else, But anyway, I was living in this halfway house, taking care of my friend's halfway house while he was in a hospital, so I at least had a place to stay while we were separated. And then he came home, and we hung out one night, and then the next morning I found him dead. And he was in the next bed. We were sharing the same room, once again, I didn't have to get loaded over that. We had a really strong family ship down Florida, and we all just banded together and walked each other through it. And his family came out, and his family wanted to do a little family, funeral. And Mike had been taking people into his home for almost 25 years, and he supported them all on a VA disability. And so that was his halfway house, and so there was no way in hell. I mean, I explained to his family that you could probably do the family, private thing, but when you come out of a church or wherever you're doing it, there's going to be a line of people up and down the road for about a mile from all over the country because he's been doing this for a long time. And so they finally opened it up, and we got the biggest place that we could, and we had a big time funeral, and it's a celebration. I don't know about what they do over here, in your neighborhood. We have celebrations of life when somebody dies clean. And we bring the coin, and we drop it in the box with them so if they've got something to go with. And we celebrated his life for almost 3 hours in that room, and we took him on up to the graveyard, and we all dropped flowers and cried and boo-hooed, and then we went out and had a big feast together, and we talked about Mike, and we still talk about him every year, around his birthday. A lot of us get together and talk on the phone and Zoom together, and But meanwhile, I was separated from my wife, and I felt like I had lost my best friend, and then I lost Mike, and I was kind of lost and lonely, and Nance, my wife's name is Nancy. Nance was aware that Mike had passed, and so, we started talking on the phone so that we could, she, like I said, she's always been my best friend for a long, long time, and so she stuck up for me, and we still continued to talk, and gradually over a period of time, we realized that we didn't want to blow the friendship, and at the same time, we had to resolve this issue with us, and so I didn't mention, I guess, in the beginning that I was a Pentecostal Assembly God preacher's kid, and I had a lot of issues with the church, and I went out west and hung out with my daughter for Christmas, that year, and spent about a month and a half with her. She and the kids kept on passing the flu back and forth, and I never got it for some reason, but I spent my time just bleaching walls where the kids were walking by, and trying to take care of them, make sure they stayed hydrated, fed something, whatever they needed. And at the same time, I had a whole lot of time just to think. And I couldn't think, I knew there was something lacking in my program. There's something lacking in my program no matter how many times I've done steps. There's no matter how many times I've, taken all these fifth steps with people and made amends and blah, blah. There's still something lacking in my program, and I couldn't figure it out. And so I came to the conclusion that maybe I would go back to my roots. And so I called my wife at that time, and I said, honey, I think I'm going to come home and go to church with you next Sunday. And she just kind of sat there in shock, because I had so much animosity towards this place that there was no way in heck that I could go there, And she went ahead and says, well, we've been praying for you to come, so why don't you come and check it out this week? And I said, sure. So I flew back to Florida, is where we were at that time, and then she called me up almost as soon as I touched down, and she informed me that the preacher was talking about tithing. I probably didn't want to go this week. And I told her if the guy can't get me on tithing, he's probably not going to get me anyway. And so I went to church, and long story short, I ended up finding a lot of what was lacking in my life. And what was lacking in my life is, I took the God as my understanding. In the beginning, my first God of my understanding was Bobby. That's my first sponsor, and whatever Bobby told me, whatever he said, I took care of. I did exactly what he told me, whenever he told me, and usually he could walk me through it, But there were times that Bobby wasn't available. Bobby would be sick. Bobby would be this, and so I learned that maybe it was my group, and I could find other men in the group that I could talk to, and there were some things that I would go through sometimes that Bobby wouldn't relate to. And so I would talk to men in the group, because if I listened, I could always find somebody. I had a sponsee come and say he lost his wife to another woman, and he had no idea how to cope with that. I didn't anyway. That's not been part of my experience, but I'd heard a guy named Jack. I says, why don't you go talk to Jack, and Jack can talk to you about that stuff. Just go up there and start talking, say, Jack, can I talk to you? And start telling him your stuff and see what happens. And sure enough, Jack walked him through that stuff, and he did not have to get loaded, And so I keep my ears open for resource, and that's where I try to use them for my sponsees. I try to use them for me, and those are the people who can walk me through stuff. And little by slow, after Nance and I got back together, we kind of hung out for a long, long time, and I slept in the spare room for a long time, but we still hung out as a family, and then little by slow, I've worked my way back to the bedroom, and we actually have a good long relationship. We've been married a little over 20, we're going up on 24 years here shortly. And that's the longest I've ever been with anybody in my life, even my family. My dad and I couldn't stay together past 15. So anyway, it's been a heck of a ride. Like I said, everything that's ever happened to me, everything that ever good has happened in my life, it's been a God story, man. And every time everything screws up, usually it's me taking over again. And I'm sorry I'm not as exciting as a whole lot of other speakers, but I just wanted to come up here and let you all know that no matter what's going on in your life, if you don't get loaded, you'll probably be happier next week, next month, next year when all this crap passes. And so, and if you reach out to a higher power and keep on being open-minded about the fact that your higher power can evolve as you go along, then it'll probably be okay. So anyway, thanks a lot for letting me share.